Okay, so we're going to start off by talking about the two types of paid calls. As you see here, we have an ad, a Google ad. So one example of a paid call is if you click here, it will direct you to a landing page. But this ad actually has two calls to action. The other is to click here, and that would prompt an outbound call. Okay, so one ad, two calls to action. So if you were to click the ad anywhere other than the phone number, it would bring you to something like this. While if you were to click the phone number, it would prompt you to be doing an outbound call. Okay, so if you click to a landing page, there are two significant things that are going to happen. One is that CallTrackingMetrics tracking code will be on the page, and two is that Google Analytics tracking code will be on the page. So that way, both us and Google are tracking the session, while for a click to call, when somebody interacts with one of those, the person does not hit a landing page, so thus CallTrackingMetrics tracking script isn't there, and neither is Google Analytics. So because of that, this is an offline source because we're not going to be able to track and attribute a session to it. But don't worry, we have ways to have these count as conversions and attribute all the value to it. All right, so with that, we have the two different types of paid calls, and because of that, we have two different integrations to get that data into our system and into Google Ads as conversions. So let's go ahead and watch this quick video, which will help explain the two different types of paid calls. So enjoy.
Welcome to CallTrackingMetrics training video. In this workshop, we're going to be covering the setup of CallTrackingMetrics integration with Google Analytics and AdWords. Before you begin, you must have user access to Google Analytics, admin access to CallTrackingMetrics. You must be using the same email address to log into both systems. The CallTrackingMetrics tracking script should be installed on your website. The Google Analytics tracking script should also be installed on your website. Google Analytics and Google AdWords should be synced and communicating. Lastly, auto-tagging needs to be enabled in AdWords. CallTrackingMetrics has two integrations for the two types of Google paid calls, Google Analytics and Google AdWords. The AdWords integrations tracks calls from click-to-call ads and call extensions, while the Analytics integrations tracks and attributes data from click-to-landing pages. When performing a search, it's common for ads to have multiple call to actions, like displaying a phone number to call or a link to click. When you click to the landing page, there will be a GCLID in the URL. This is Google's paid click identifier. It essentially acts as a unique receipt numbers for paid clicks. When you click to a landing page, CallTrackingMetrics tracking script is present, as well as Google Analytics tracking script. The two softwares match sessions data and share session data. While for click-to-call, Google AdWords uses a Google forwarding number, which forwards to a call tracking number, and the two systems match and pass data. Two types of paid calls, both reporting as conversions in AdWords.
So here we go. So right here, we have our two different tracking numbers. We have this one and this one. Underneath is the label of the tracking number. Keep that in mind because I'll be referencing that again in a moment. And we have our tracking sources over here. So we have one for ad extensions and one for Google Ads. So again, the key separator between these two is that one is an online source, as we can see here, on-site, and one is an off-site source. So for the Google Ads, we're going to be doing dynamic number insertion on the page, while for an ad extension, we're not going to be doing any dynamic number insertion. Thus, we don't need a target number because we will be never swapping for that. Okay, so let's continue on to explore this by looking at the call log. So here I have a filtered view of the call log, and really with these two integrations, we're trying to do one thing, and that's to capture all the session data. So right here we have a great example of when we've successfully captured and attributed the data. So if we look right here, this first part of the session data is going to tell us the landing page the user came in on. If we scroll down, this is going to tell us the referring website. And this one is going to tell us the searched keywords. Now, one thing that's important to remember is that the searched keywords is the actual search term, not the keywords that you're bidding on. So these won't always be the keywords inside of your campaigns. So if I click anywhere in this box, it'll expand to give us the full view of the session data we've captured. So if we look over here, we can see we were able to capture the UA property. Now this is the UA property on the page that our tracking code recognized. That doesn't necessarily mean that's the property we're sending the calls into. Okay, and then down here we have some of the data we're able to capture. So we can see the campaign, we can see the ad group keyword, source medium, and ad content. And that's really all we're just pulling forward. We're able to capture all the attribution about that click, which led to the call. Okay, so we have some other useful things. If we come over here to this check analytics button and select that, that's going to actually give us a view of all the events that we've sent into analytics. So let me backtrack. First, we're going to be covering this in great depth in just a minute, but we do send all forms, calls, and texts into analytics as events, which is really an activity that takes place on a web page. So here it's showing us all the different events that we've sent in, and it's going to tell us what property in analytics we sent them to. So I know I sent them into this property, and then it'll tell us little bits of attributes about them. So we can see we've actually had quite a few go in. Okay, so if you ever think, I'm not seeing the data in analytics, this is a great place to check because this is just a direct reflection from inside of analytics. So that would mean that we did send it. Maybe we need to look into a different view. So it's a nice little troubleshooting tool. So a few other things to keep in mind when we're talking about, capturing the session data. One is that this information does come in delayed. What happens is we send the event into analytics after the call, text, or form is completed. And then we basically are like, hey, analytics, we tracked this session. Did you track this session as well? And then they sandwich the sessions together, and the analytics will pass us all the data that they had, and then that will populate into the call log. So all this comes in delayed. It typically comes in between 20 minutes and 2 hours, but we have seen times when it has taken up to 24 hours. There's really no rhyme or reason when it comes in quicker or more delayed. And there's nothing that we can really do to help troubleshoot that. So I always recommend waiting at least 24 hours before, thinking that there's any fires or anything going wrong. Okay, now as far as this information, this will come in as the call comes in.
Welcome to CallTrackingMetrics training video. In this workshop, we're going to be covering how CallTrackingMetrics sends events into Google Analytics. CallTrackingMetrics sends events into Google Analytics for every inbound call, text, and form. An event in Google Analytics can be broken up into 4 main components: category, action, label, value. By default, the category will be calls. Inside of CTM, there are several different ways to customize the category of an event. The action will always be equal to the name of the tracking source. The label is made of 4 parts. The label of the tracking number. If the tracking number isn't labeled, it will report as not set. Next is the tracking number that was dialed, followed by whether or not this was a first-time or repeat caller. Lastly, the unique call identification number. By default, the value refers to seconds of talk time. If you have call conversion events enabled, the value will be the entered conversion amount. Commonly, the category will be calls. The action will always match the tracking source. Here's an example of how a call sale event would report in Google Analytics. Here's another example of how an event could report in Analytics. To view the events in Analytics, select the Behaviors tab. From the Behaviors tab drop-down, select Events, Events Overview. The Event Overview will display your top-performing events in Analytics. Hopefully these terms are starting to look familiar. Category, action, and label. If you click into the Calls category, it will display the total number of reported calls. From here you can select the action. The action will display your calls broken out by tracking source. If you click into one of the event action, it will bring you to the label view for just that tracking source. The label will display the 4 components of the event label. These are the basic fields of an event in Google Analytics. However, if you want to view additional information, you can do that by adding secondary dimensions to your report in Analytics. I would recommend viewing this data under the label view. Remember that an event is not a conversion. To set up a call conversion, you'll need to create a goal in Analytics. Thanks for watching.
Okay, now we can all say that we're experts at events. Well, we know a little bit more. Okay, so now we're going to start talking about our integrations. So the theme of today is Google Analytics and Google Ads. So we do have our 2 integrations. So again, Google Analytics is able to send all calls, forms, and text to Analytics as events. From there, they can be imported into Google Ads conversions, while the Google Ads side strictly handles our tracking and attribution for click-to-calls and call extensions in Google Ads. So to start, we're going to start talking about the Google Analytics side of things. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and click inside. So here we're already integrated. We can see lots of toggles and information. So let's start with a clean slate and unlink so that if you're new, this is what it would look like. Okay, so our first step is going to be to connect CallTrackingMetrics to Google Analytics. So, So when you're connecting, you want to make sure you select the user that has access to the property that you're trying to connect to. So I know that this user does, and I'm going to go ahead and select Allow. Okay. So now it's going to show me a list of all the different properties that I have access to. Now I have access to a whole bunch of them, so I'm just going to use the search to pull up my my correct property and select Use Profile. Now at this point, we know that we're connected. It will tell us the property we're connected to, the UA code of that property, as well as the person connecting the both of us, or CTM to Analytics. Okay, once you're connected, you'll notice that all these toggles will populate. Now, by default, the first 2 will be enabled. The first one is simply allowing us to send events into Google Analytics. And the second one is allowing us to do that when there's no visitor data available. So this is strictly up to you. You have the flexibility to enable or disable this. It's just a matter of how your business objectives work. Do you want offsite data going into your analytics or not? No right or wrong answer there. Okay. For this next one, it allows us to send a different category of events, and that's going to be for a call sale. So by enabling this option here, if we jump back to over here, anytime we score a call, it'll send an additional event into Analytics with the value of this marked conversion. So this is a great way to measure leads versus sales inside of Analytics. And when we send a typical call event into Analytics, the value is going to be the seconds of talk time. So in this case, that would be 17, while the call sale amount would be 99. Now I can actually show you this in a little bit more detail by opening this up. And if we go back to our Check Analytics button, now here we can see we had a call go in as inbound call. So that was our main event. And then we scored the call and it's an additional event under the call sale. You can see the value for this one is 19, while the value for that one is 17. So this one is referencing seconds of talk time, while this one is referencing the scored amount. Okay. So with that, we also give you the ability to ensure that only one call sale event is sent into analytics. And the reason this option came about is from a too many cooks in the kitchen scenario where we had multiple people going in and changing the conversion amount, which resulted in us sending multiple events into analytics. And what happens is those events can't consolidate, they just stack. So rather than sending one correct value, people were sending in maybe 5 or 6 incorrect values, so that the value actually was way inflated, and it just kind of threw some things off. So this is just a little safeguard there that'll ensure that we only send one. Okay. So this one, I have another little video to help explain, so we're going to revisit that in just a moment. The next one, I think, kind of speaks to the evolution of call tracking metrics. When we started, we were strictly calls, and we've evolved over the years. We now offer inbound texting, outbound texting, and forms. We have chat coming out in the near future. So we have these different types of activities. So historically, we send all calls, forms, and text into analytics under the category of calls, which is kind of outdated now, and it makes more sense to categorize them by the activity type so that your forms aren't going into analytics under the category of calls. They'll go under the category forms. This makes a little bit of sense. So this, I do highly recommend this option. It just makes your data a little bit easier to read and understand. Okay, so this last one here is pretty cool too. It'll allow us to automatically associate the cost of a click for a Google AdWords call to it. So if somebody clicked on the ad, it cost, $5. We're able to attribute that cost to the session data. The only thing to know about this one is that it does use triggers, and that trigger is only available on a marketing and contact center plan. So if you're on a business plan or maybe some of our legacy plans and you don't see this option, that would be why. Okay. So I do have another video to explain the fourth toggle here. So let's take a look at that.
Meet Ken. Ken is going to help explain how the fourth toggle inside the call tracking metrics integration with Google Analytics helps his business. Ken is a man of many trades and owns 3 separate businesses. He's a plumber, a builder, and a videographer. He has a separate website for each of his services and is tracking them with separate Google Analytics profiles. Even though he has 3 separate businesses, all of them ring directly to his cell phone. Call Tracking Metrics allows Ken to have unique tracking numbers on each of his websites, so he can identify the service a caller is interested in and the analytics property tracking the visits. Call Tracking Metrics allows Ken to be extra prepared for every call by playing a whisper message announcing which service and promotion the caller is interested in. Call Tracking Metrics will identify the Google Analytics profile on the web page and send the event into that profile, even if it's different from the profile connecting CTM and Analytics. If an analytics property isn't discovered on the page, the event will default into the analytics profiles that's linked to CTM. This is extremely helpful for small businesses who want to use one Call Tracking Metrics account but send events into multiple Google Analytics accounts.
Okay, so just a little recap on what that video is explaining. So with this toggle, rather than sending the events into the property that we're connected to here, we would actually look at your web page and identify the property there and then send the event into that property. Now, we do only recommend using that on a small scale, because say you're sending your events into 10 different properties. So with that, if you're trying to troubleshoot and you can't find the events, it'll be very hard to backtrack because we've scattered the data across so much, or across so many playing fields. So if you are interested in sending events into multiple different properties, we would definitely recommend probably being on our marketing plan and having a different sub account so you can be at more of a 1-to-1 ratio. Okay, so it's really the basics of setting up the integration here. And again, all these toggles, there's no right or wrong option. It's just whatever makes the most sense for your business and your objectives. So the next piece of this would be heading over into analytics and checking out the events. So again, we send our calls, texts, and forms into Google Analytics as events, and they can be found under the Behaviors tab. And then we have events, and we have our event overview. Okay. So here we have our top events, and you can see we have a bunch of them. And I guess one important thing to remember is that not all events are from CallTrackingMetrics. So like this I don't know what that is. That has nothing to do with us. That's from some other aspect of the website. So the default category is calls, but you also have the ability to score calls and have them go in as call sale. Or if you have that toggle enabled to categorize them by activity, you're going to see something like this: inbound call, form, and inbound message. So for this example, we're going to click into the inbound calls. Okay. So right here, this is going to give you a really high-level snapshot of the calls that we've sent in. It's going to tell us we've sent in a total of 21 calls, and that of those 21 calls, they have a total value of 659. Now, in this case, that's going to be seconds of talk time. So that's not speaking to any dollar amount, but we know that the total talk time of these 21 calls was just over 10 minutes, and that the average value of these calls was 31. So that's saying that the average phone call is 30 seconds long. Now, this is a demo account, so inside of your account, these should probably be a lot higher. Okay, so if we wanted to see a little bit more granular information about these calls, we can click over into the event action over here. Okay, so what this is going to do is it's going to break down these 21 calls we have by source. So again, we have 21 calls, 7 of them were to Google AdWords, 4 to Twitter, 4 to website, and so forth. So this is going to allow us to also see, which ones have the longest talk time or like the highest average. So another way that we can measure quality. Okay. So if I click into any individual source here or action, that will bring me to the event label for it. So I could do a jump right here, and that'll bring me to the event label of all of them. Or I can come over to the event action, and maybe I just want to view my Google Ads calls. So from here, I can see some more in-depth data. Now, if we remember from the video that the label is made up of 4 components. One, it's going to be the label of the tracking number itself. Now, if from the beginning you remember from over here, each tracking number can have its own unique label. So that's all that's reflecting. This is going to be the tracking number that was dialed. This is going to be whether or not this was a first time or repeat caller. And this is going to be the unique call ID. So this is actually going to be able to tell us what call this was inside a CTM. So that is the main components of the event, but there's a lot more data that's embedded in them that we can view. So we could do that by adding in a secondary dimension. So we could do something like source and medium is a common one. So in this case, we're looking for Google and CPC. So assuming that the data was all coming through correctly, that's what we'd see. So these all look good. Why this one looks like something went wrong there. If we come back, we go to, maybe I want to see the keywords. Okay, so this is actually all from our chocolate store. So our keywords are going to be very sweets based. So we can see, they were searching for organic chocolate or chocolate with truffles. And if you see the little asterisk here, what that's referencing is that this is a shopping campaign, because shopping campaigns aren't matching by keywords, they're matching by description. So you might see something along these lines with display campaigns as well. So this actually means everything is working properly. It's just there's not a keyword to associate with it. Okay. So that's the event, and the events are really exactly as it sounds. It's saying that, this action took place in time. Like, it's just reporting that this event happened. So what we want to do is we want to qualify those events and then import them into Google Ads as a conversion. So to do so, we would head over into our admin panel, and we'd head over to our goals, and we would say new goal. Now, I think Google A/B tests this because sometimes I see this, sometimes I don't. So if you don't see it, don't worry about it because we're just going to come down here and hit custom. So the first step is to name our goal. I usually like to name it something pretty descriptive. For today's purpose, I'm just going to call it a phone call, and I'm going to put today's date of 1/23/19. And for the type, hopefully there's no confusion here. It should be an event. Here we go. So now for the next part, we have to decide how these would report. So the category. So I actually have this one up because I like to reference back and forth. So events, overview. Now, this is where things can get a little tricky because if you are using multiple ways to categorize your events, then you need to create multiple goals. So make sure when you're creating your goal, you're using the correct category. Inside of the system, we also give you the ability to create custom categories. That's something that you might want to do a little bit sparingly because the view will only allow you to create 20 different goals. So if you want to create goals for all your different events and you have over 20 different categories, you're not going to be able to accomplish that. So for this example, I'm going to use inbound calls or inbound call. Inbound call. Now it is important that the spelling, capitalization, and spelling is consistent. Analytics is very much, a robot, and it can't make human logic like, a lowercase c to an uppercase C. So this right here is really all we need to create a goal. But what's nice is we have lots of flexibility to further qualify this goal. So maybe I want this goal to only complete for calls to my Google AdWords. So I could say Google AdWords. And again, this is something we might just want to reference, not forums. So if I come to my events, I can see I can actually just grab this and paste it in just to make sure it's exactly consistent. Okay, so now this goal will only complete for inbound calls to the source of Google AdWords. So I've already further qualified it. But maybe I only want it to be to first-time callers. So to do that, I would need to switch to regular expression and then do first-call. Now again, I'm pulling that from, if we go to our label, you can see that it's first-call. So that's what we're telling the goal to look for. Okay, so now the goal will only complete for inbound calls to the source of Google AdWords. That's a first-time caller. We're doing a good job of qualifying this, but we have this last little piece we can use. And again, the bottom three are all optional when creating the goal. They're just further ways to qualify it. So the value is seconds of talk time. So why this I think is really important is we send an event for every call, whether or not it was answered, or it could have been, a hang up, it could have been a voicemail, it could have been an after hours call. There's a lot of, calls that take place that aren't, necessarily quality. So by putting a greater than for seconds, it'll allow us to further qualify this. So I could put in 180. So that's going to be 3 minutes. So now I'm saying this call has to be an inbound call to the source AdWords, a first-time caller, and the conversation lasted more than 3 minutes long. Okay, so then we can go ahead and hit save. So now our goal is created. So our next piece is to get this goal inside of Google Ads. So to do that, we can jump on over here. So to do that, we're going to import it. Now, to be able to import a goal from Google Analytics to Google Ads, of course, the two systems have to be synced. You can do that inside of Google Analytics, and you can do that inside of Google Ads. But that should be a pretty standard process. Okay, so what we're going to want to do is to import the goal we just created. So to do that, we'll hit the shiny blue button, And we'll head over to import, and we're going to select Google Analytics. And from here, it's going to display all the goals we've created that we haven't yet imported. So I can see we have the one I just created here, and I'm going to say continue and import, and then bam, we are done. So now, as calls come into CTM and are completed, we're going to send the event into analytics, and then if that event hits the goal requirement and that goal is imported into Google Ads, it will then count as a conversion inside of Google Ads. So that's the full 360 of how the data flows through. Okay, so the next piece to this is to look at the Google Ads integration. Okay, so to do that, let's head back over here. If we click back, it'll take us into integrations. And here is our Google Ads integration. So we'll go ahead and hit select. Now we're already integrated. So let's go ahead and show you how this works. Okay, so if you haven't set this up, it would look like this. You need to select your source that you want to attribute for ad extensions or call extensions. And when you click in this drop down, it's only going to show you offline sources. So I can find right away, here's my ad extension, excellent. I do suggest putting on this delay, but I'm going to wait a minute to explain that. Okay, so once you hit save, this script should populate. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a script inside of analytics, inside of ads to run. So we can just go ahead and copy it and head over into ads. So to find your scripts, you're going to head over to your tools. It'll be under bulk operation scripts. And it's going to load very slowly. Oh, right, there it is. So here we already have our script that is installed. If we were to install a new one, we just hit the blue button, but let's just take a look at one we already have installed. So here we go. All you would do is simply paste that script in and name it, and then hit save and close. So once the script is installed, the last little piece you need to do is to set it to run on a frequency. Because this isn't a live JavaScript running on your website, it's something that you have to schedule to run. So the smallest time frame they give us is hourly. So we would select that and hit save, and then there we go. So if we go back to the integration real quick, the reason we have this delay for sending the events into analytics for these calls is because that allows us to capture the attribution from Google Ads before we send the event. Now the events we typically trigger right after the call is completed. So if we didn't have this enabled, when we sent it into analytics, it wouldn't have any of the campaign, ad group, or keyword attribution to it. It would go in as direct none. So enabling the delay allows enough time for the system to send data and make it consistent between the three platforms. So that's why I would recommend doing that if that is something that sounds important to you. Okay, so that's installing the script. So the next part of this, so let's go ahead and head back. Here we are, is to talk about the ad extensions themselves. So they've enabled something new, which I think is pretty handy if we go under account settings. One is that you can do account-wide call reporting. So this is something that typically we'd have to tell everyone to do per ad extension. But now you can just account-wide enable it, which is super handy. Also, this is where auto tagging is. So you definitely want to make sure that this is enabled in order to take advantage of this integration. So you might just want to double check when you're in here that that is turned on. Okay, so let's head back over to our extensions and extensions, and we have a few. Let's look at just call extensions. Here we go. So let's look at the setup of these. So I've actually been a huge fan of the new interface. Google has really simplified these configurations. So now all you would simply do is put in the ad extension number here. So this would be the call tracking metrics tracking number. You would want to ensure that call reporting is turned on, but this is now turned on at account level, so I don't have to do it for every single one. As well as now it will default to having a conversion action apply to this, which they didn't do before. Before it was set to none, so many people were actually tracking calls, but they weren't counting as conversions because it just wasn't as nice of a setup. So this is really, I think, dramatically improved. So that's really the setup for the extension, and then hit save. And with that, what happens is when the ad is generated, Google's forwarding numbers will actually replace ours. That way they're tracking it, we're tracking it, and then our script inside of ads will extract that data into the call log. So that is the ad extension and click to call portion of it. The nice thing about the script inside of ads is once it's set, it is set and forget. You don't need to go in and update that or make any changes to that at any time. Now, one thing that I do like to point out when we're looking at this view, because it does create a lot of confusion, is when we're looking at the total clicks. Now, it's very easy to assume that because we're seeing 20 total clicks to our call extensions, to assume that that equals 20 calls, but this report is just saying that a number was viewed 20 times when was visible 20 times when that ad was clicked. It doesn't necessarily translate into that number being clicked. So hopefully that makes sense. So this will actually take you to a report on your call details. And this is what's actually been tracked by Google. So while it said we had 20 clicks, we can actually see here that there were only 2 phone calls generated from those 20 clicks. So even though the ad was clicked 20 times, this was only generated, or of those 20 clicks, only 2 of them were generated to a phone call. Okay, so that is actually the ins and outs of this. I said it'd be about 45 minutes. We're at about 42. So let's head back on over into CTM. Okay, I see we had a handful of questions come in. I will do my best to address these. I did see a lot of them, and one of the things I just like to point out is that the theme of this is all Google Analytics and Google Ads. Any questions that aren't addressing that won't be discussed in the presentation. So somebody says, is there a way to push the data from CTM into a database like BigQuery or, and is there a webhook? Okay, so yes, we do have a webhook where you can push this data into other systems. That would be under our integration and then webhooks. Okay, somebody else says, what's the difference is our needing and goal setup between on-site, extension, and call-only ads? Do we need to use a regex and event actions, the source so that they can, okay. So when it comes to ad extensions and call-only ads, so inside of Google Analytics, those can't be imported into Google Ads as conversions because there's no GCLAD, there's no paid click identifier. So that's like the receipt because there was no session. So you can create a conversion for those inside of analytics and do analytics tracking on those, but because they're essentially offline sources, they can't go from analytics into ads. The conversion action has to take place inside of ads. So I hope I answered that properly. Okay. Somebody says, can you re-review where to find the check analytics section? Yes, happily. Here we go. So, I already had it up, so let's open up a new one. So if you click into any anywhere in the session data that's not like a hyperlink. And then you scroll down and then you hit this. That'll populate it. So this one was actually a form submission, so it's going to tell us that it categorized it as form and that we sent it into this property. And here's some attributes about that one. So great question. Okay. Okay, well, thank you for all these questions. Any that haven't been answered in regards to this, we will take offline. So thank you all for attending and for the great engagement.